Qinglan's words of power, powerlessness, and finding a home deeply move me. Power, Madam Sun Yat-sen was able to know of dangers and more to find and marshal resources of the United States to get Qinglan's family out of Taiwan, out of China, out of mainland China, and to find safety. But even then it wasn't immediate, because our country too had barriers in place at that time. The power of politics is enormous. Power, the word power, means the ability to affect change. I learned that from Walter Mondale's campaign manager. He said to a group of rabbis, a lot of people are afraid of the word politics, and they're afraid of the word power. Know that power is simply the ability to affect change, and it can be used for good or for bad. I was in Washington, D.C. this week, and I met with our Congresswoman's aide, with Mimi Walters' aide. I met with Dianne Feinstein's aide and Kamala Harris's aide. And I was at the State Department this week. But that's not what I'm going to talk about first. I'm going to talk about a Republican that I deeply admire, and that's Senator John McCain, a great American, truly representing the best of our nation. I had the privilege to be getting on a plane to return on Thursday night, and Senator McCain was in line next to me. And I said to him, Senator McCain, I'm just coming from the State Department, where we've been lobbying on behalf of maintaining the budget for the State Department. Because in the press, though the new budget proposal of the administration has not come forward, but the claim was as much as a 35% cut. And I said, I do hope that you maintain the budget of our State Department. And he said, I can assure you I will try my best. Our administration will learn, he said, that there are 3 branches of government, and that you can't make decisions on the budget without the other branches. He said, what happened in Libya, we don't want to happen again, which meant having the resources to protect our embassies. So I got on the plane with him, and we went through the business section, and I said to him, I thought you travel a lot. Why aren't you using your miles to be in the better seats? He said, I do travel a lot, but they don't let me use the miles, which I didn't quite understand. And I walked with him up the aisle, and he kept walking. I was in row 29, meaning closer to the restrooms than I normally like to be. And I'm walking, and he's walking, and I sit down in my aisle seat, and he sits down in the row behind me. He has a worse seat. And I, as you know, like to interview great people. I am an Arizona boy, and I have admired Senator McCain for his integrity throughout his career. And so at a certain point, when I saw he had opened his eyes after doing crossword puzzles and having dozed off, I went over and I said, could I just sit with you and ask a few questions? He moved over to the middle seat. He said, sit down. What do you want to ask? After an hour and a half, I said, you deserve some rest. So I just have one closing question for you. What would you want to say to an Arizona boy from the countryside that pulls our conversation, who's now a rabbi in California, to pull our conversation together? And he said, come back to Arizona. And then he reached into his pocket and he pulled out his iPhone and he said, you see this? This is why America was the country of the 20th century. This device is as revolutionary as Gutenberg's printing press. It changes the world. And this device and the work of those who work in technology are largely immigrants. We are a nation of immigrants. That's our greatness, he said, and I want you to have hope in this nation as it moves forward. One other little piece. He then went back to reading a book, a gift from Bono. He said, he showed me the inscription. A book called Poems of War, written by Siegfried Sassoon. Now, as a Jew, my flags went off when I see Siegfried Sassoon writing in England in the World War I. He said, this is a book that teaches us of the dangers of war. These poems led to mass protests between the wars, against war. And I was reminded, as he returned to his book on war, how his life experience had informed for him what mattered. As he would say to me amidst that conversation, a priority, the number one priority, he said, is our military, because it has to keep us safe, and funding has to keep our soldiers safe. We can't underfund those we put into danger. His world is a remarkable life. There's much more to share about that conversation, but that's part one. Part one is the greatness of our country, that a man who has served our nation in every way sits in coach without any aids, without any pretension, and who will sit with a young man, I'm no longer the young man, a younger man who identifies himself as a Democrat and as a rabbi, and will share of himself in the most accepting and empowering ways. That does not occur around the world. Part two. The reason I was in Washington is I'm a fellow this year for the American Jewish World Service. American Jewish World Service is a Jewish organization that gives out over $30 million a year to grassroots human rights organizations in 18 different countries, making American Jewish World Service the fourth largest human rights defender of any organization in the country, with the name and identity as Jews. When we came to the State Department on Thursday, this was the second visit, having visited a year before with another group of rabbinic fellows. There were 5 leaders at this conference from the State Department. Most of them were people of color. Do you know that the majority of people that work for the State Department, it's the one department, are people of color? Because to get, which is not like being a congressional or senatorial aide, for that you have to have connections. The 25-year-old who represents Representative Mimi Walters is from Newport Beach. Nothing wrong with being from Newport Beach, but it's not her constituency. But it is a potential source of opportunity. And almost all the aides were, not unlike her, people whose families had connections. Not so for career diplomats. For career diplomats, for people working for the State Department, that's an aspiration, that you can make a difference and be part of a country that you don't take for granted. And so we met with 5 State Department representatives. One being an Undersecretary of State for racial identity issues. Because the problem in the Dominican Republic that we as Jews were going to address was the problem of Dominicans of Haitian origin. What is that, you might say, and why would Jews care? In the Dominican Republic, that shares the same island with Haiti, Espanola, Sugar cane was the major crop. In Haiti, it was even more so than in the Dominican Republic. And Haiti tended to, in the 1800s, bring in large numbers of slaves to harvest that sugar cane. And when the Dominican Republic started developing their sugar cane industry, at the beginning of the 20th century, they too drew from Haiti many of the harvesters. 25, 30 years ago, 100 harvesters were replaced by one combine and a worker in those sugarcane fields. And the Dominicans of Haitian origin became very much an underclass. In 1929, in Haiti, modeling themselves after the United States, they had a law that said if you were born in the DR, Dominican Republic, you were a citizen. A new right-wing government that is now in place has blamed many of the economic problems on the underclass, on the Haitians, who are Dominicans. And in a Supreme Court ruling in 2013, reversed that long-standing ruling that to be born in the country doesn't mean you have a right to citizenship. And by the way, I don't know how many of you were at the debate between UCI Dean Irvin Chemerinsky that the Federation hosted and Professor Easton of Chapman University, where Professor Easton, who had been the chair of the Chapman Law School and had previously clerked for Clarence Thomas in his youth, said that the United States Constitution needs revisiting and the Supreme Court holding is warranted to fix the mistake of giving U.S. citizenship to people born in this country. That, too, is not a given. And so back to the Dominican Republic. What's happened in the Dominican Republic is the following. Here's the story. One of the agencies I visited with was a legal aid society. Before me is a young man named Junior. He's 21 years old. He has in his hand a birth certificate. But the birth certificate has not been validated once he got older than 18. Without a valid birth certificate in the Dominican Republic, he cannot go to university. He cannot get health coverage. He can't even get a cell phone, technically. You must be a citizen. In the Dominican Republic, you need your birth certificate validated when you reach majority age, and he no longer had a relationship with his parents. For 3 years, he had been going back and forth to bureaucracies, each with different rules, each exerting enormous discretion to reject and move forward his claim of citizenship. Next to him is a young woman, also about 21. She was born at home, Haitian origin, meaning black. These are the blacks, people of the Dominican Republic. Because she was born at home, she wasn't registered and therefore also had no birth certificate, and without that birth certificate, she too was unable to go to the university. Next to them, at the table with me, was a lawyer, a young woman. And she said to Junior, if you can get me the transcripts from school, from high school, I can help you use those transcripts to get your birth certificate validated. His eyes filled with tears. It was his first hope, his first lawyer. I said to him, have you ever been to a lawyer before? He said, no. I said, why not? He said, I couldn't afford it. At the State Department, the 5 people there, 2 doing most of the talking, 3 doing much of the talking, were aware of this issue. It had been brought to their attention primarily by American Jewish World Service over the last 2 years. Initially, when American Jewish World Service went there, they followed the statement of the Dominican Republic, which is we have a path to citizenship. It's just a matter of people knowing and applying. In the intervening 2 years, because of the work of a Jewish woman, Ruth Messenger, and her organization, this had now become a cause for our embassy in the Dominican Republic. I went to the U.S. Embassy, and the aide in charge of policy would identify herself as from the south side of Chicago, from a Puerto Rican family. She had, in the intervening year since the last group, the first group from American Jewish World Service, had gone to the barrios to meet with these Dominicans of Haitian origin and had made it her cause. In D.C., they said, most Dominicans don't care about this because people are doing fine. These are the other. They don't care about whether they are cared for. But our embassy now cares, and our embassy has clout, because the embassy in the Dominican Republic and around the world is powerful because of trade relations. Last, the story of Purim. The story of Purim is first the story of the power of the king. Listen to how it begins. King Ahasuerus, displaying the abundant riches of his empire and the glory and pomp of his greatness for as many as 180 days. He made a party. Drinks were dispensed in goblets of gold and goblets of various kinds, and the royal wine was abundant, as befits a king. Drinking was according to the principle of you don't have to stop, for so the king had established every student's palace to do as each subject had wished. Power, wealth is often accumulated. Do you know who, according to Forbes magazine, is the richest man in the world today? According to Forbes, respected, and their lists of the wealthiest of the world. Who do you think is the wealthiest man? Howard. Exactly. Richer than Bill Gates. Vladimir Putin and his kleptocrats are the wealthiest in the world today in a short time, because politics is power. Politics is power, the ability to affect change. Change you can affect for your own self-serving purposes, or power that you can use to affect change for those who lack power. And so I'll pull this together. Politics is Jewish. That does not mean that it's appropriate for me ever to suggest by name a candidate that I support or don't support. But it does mean that the values with which we as a nation live matter. That the Bible speaks of taking care of the widow and the orphan, not because they are your family. They are not necessarily because they're related to you immediately, but because we're challenged to see the world through God's eyes. When we went to the State Department, two of my colleagues presented. It was Thursday, it was the fast of Esther, and they said to them, we're going to be reading from the book of Esther, and the book of Esther, she will say, it is perhaps for this moment that I was created to talk truth to power. What I found is that they were genuinely moved by linking the reading of Scripture with the work that they do and the values of being a nation that seeks at its best, like Senator McCain, to be unpretentiously available and seeking with integrity to do the work of the greater good. Ribbon Shalom, Master of the universe, let us not be afraid. Al tira. Let us not be afraid of power, for power can be good when the values that underlie it are for a greater good, for you. Amen.